Hello, and welcome to Covert Castaway. Today we're going to talk about offshore maintenance, how we're preparing to manage all of the maintenance once we're on board, and we're going to discuss a little bit about all the tools and spares we're going to need. Hello, and welcome to Covert Castaway. I'm Holly.
Je suis Stéphane.
Join us as we share what we learned and how we're making the transition to liveaboard cruising. Hey, buddy. How's France?
Lonely. I miss you, buddy.
I miss you too. So I'm in Santa Monica and Stephane's still in France, where it looks like the Airbnb looks like it might be a little hot there. It's nice and breezy here. Just the weather got better. So that's been cool. What have you been up to? How's the boat doing? I saw the pictures.
Well, I went to see the boat last week with my sister, who was in town for a few days. And there was some, it's like from week to week, it depends. There are certain things that are very visual. You can see how the boat progressed. And then, but then we got the pictures as we get every Friday. And I was like, whoa, a lot of stuff happened. Like they put the coach roof on. So everything changes,
Yeah, and they put the beam on too. That's exciting.
The chair on the knife at the knife station. So suddenly it's like furniture.
I know.
So it feels like, wow, it's moving closer.
Yeah, coming along.
I probably need to swing by to go check this latest, kind of the latest progress to visualize that.
Very cool. So we wanted to share with everybody, at the last Outremer week, we went to an offshore maintenance class, which was very informative. Stéphane had done one of these in a previous Outremer week, and I was really happy to sit in on it and kind of understand that duct tape and WD-40 does fix everything pretty much. Most things. Mm-hmm. That was one of the things he led with. But in that class, it was really useful just to understand the systems and what needs to get maintained, some routines that you need to sort of be in, and checklists. And as we're waiting to get the boat, thinking about how we want to organize ourselves a little bit, it's easy once you get on the boat and you're like, oh, it's a new boat. It'll be fine. We'll check it tomorrow. And I think having some discipline and forethought on this would be good, don't you think?
Well, we bought a new boat.
Yeah, but
to not have to deal with any issues. No, yeah, definitely. So it's good to start from the beginning to have the right approach. I think in general, this training, it reminds you of all the different systems that are on board. And when you look at a boat, you might not see all those systems, but it's really like a little city. You have electricity, you have the electronics, you have everything related to communication and IT, you have diesel, you have the plumbing, you have the rigging. It's a lot of systems. And so I think it's good to break it down, and also to maybe in certain areas, maybe like between us, somebody who is more inclined in some areas to kind of dive a little deeper to extend their knowledge. But I think that even though it's kind of overwhelming when you start breaking down all these systems, you're like, holy crap. At the same time, it's not required to be an expert. You might become over time an expert in some areas, but the idea is to kind of have a general understanding of those systems. I mean, and then that's probably like the starting point. But
I think the other thing, and this is going to sound so obvious and rhetorical, basically, is just sort of leading with the idea that the ocean and the salt water is just a really corrosive, aggressive environment. And the key is to look for things and prevent things from happening. and look for things early so that they don't become bigger problems. I mean, again, this is super simple thing to say, but once you're on the boat, it gets easy to sort of look past some things. And that was a really good reminder too of just doing walk-arounds every day and just kind of checking things out and being curious about, some things going on in the boat.
Yeah, I mean, water, salt, like you said, there is humidity in some areas, so potentially detecting corrosion early. The boat is being shaken around, so things might move. So it might be good to also take pictures or videos at the beginning. So when you look at something, you're like, is that normal? Was it always like this?
Right.
And then you to things like this, but it's definitely like an environment that is very, how can I say, very bad for any systems.
Right.
And so yeah, there is definitely stuff that common sense can help you in most cases to hopefully prevent for things to go wrong.
And definitely, when you're living in a house, it's easier to sort of overlook stuff because the problem might get worse, but it's not gonna like risk your life, right? I think on a boat, I think that's the thing is some of these things could actually risk your life if you let them go. So that's a little bit different than in a house. You're like, yeah, I don't know if that crack really matters or not. If you see a crack in a wall or something like that, but in a boat, it's kind of a problem. So I don't know. Anyway, it's a little bit different. Anyway, yeah. So I think we learned some kind of interesting things. We went through and talked about, just the different checklists, which we'll go through, and then setting up a maintenance schedule.
Yeah, maybe before we go into the checklist, I thought there was, they talked about 3 different sailing modes. And I thought that was good, like you were referring to what you're talking about. There is the fully functional, you're happy with everything on the boat, is working. There is the downgraded mode, so you might not be able to use something on your boat, but you can still go from point A to point B safely. So you just know that it's something you're going to have to take care of, but it's not going to affect how you go from point A to point B. Maybe you just monitor that. And then there is the dangerous mode. So that's kind of what you're talking about. And know in this case that, then you need to shift gears to deal with that. And so that was something that was good to break that down also in different.
Yeah,
different
that's a really
modes.
good way to think about it. It's like, okay, this is an inconvenience, but we can work around it. And then, then there's sort of, okay, we got to keep an eye on it. And then there's, okay, we need to actually divert our trip or change our plans or whatever to get something looked at.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And another thing to take away is also testing stuff. And you might have tested it once and it was working. And then, time goes by and then, you assume it's still working.
Right.
But I think in general for boats, if it's not being used regularly, typically it's not going to work properly when you need it. So basically to test systems regularly, like maybe bilge pumps or, your VHF, naturally will test it. You'll use it regularly, your AIS, your radar, doing kind of regular testings. I think that's also a good practice to make sure that.
That's a really good point. And even in the testing system, sometimes you don't do something for a while and you forget how to use it, especially when there's so many systems on board, And so even just kind of looking at some of the systems and doing a test and making sure you remember how it works. I mean, some of these things are pretty straightforward, but some are like, a little bit more complicated. So that's good. The other thing that's really cool about the boat we're getting is they're putting in what are the sensors or phone home capability or something with what is that system called?
It's called SailSense. And so I looked at it a few months ago, and I know we're going to get it on our boat, but I'll need to go look again at what it does. But generally, you can access remotely your boat and kind of monitor certain things.
Well, and they can too. Like they can look at, where like how many hours are on the engines and what's going on, in some of these systems, right? That was the idea.
So there'll be a phase 1 and phase 2. Yeah. So phase 1 is it's just a certain level, and phase 2 that ultimately they'll develop where you'll be able to do like preventive maintenance or be able to do notifications. So for example, if the fridge has been working for the past 2 hours, for example, then you can send a message to the owner and says, hey, can you check the door of the fridge or the freezer is closed because the fridge has been working. So, things like these that ultimately kind of be having a fully connected boat. So that'll be kind of a phase 2. I think in phase 1 is more, we're going to be able to remotely access certain systems on our boat from our phones and look at stuff. But we'll probably do kind of maybe a special podcast about this system once we're on the boat.
Mm-hmm. So what they covered in the class was, I was just kind of going through. So performing maintenance routines in the checklist, which we're going to go through later in the discussion. Maintaining all the equipment and making improvements. Talked a lot about safety and just preventing accidents, which seems obvious, but you have to just be thoughtful about it. Planning the maintenance and planning for doing certain things in certain places, because you'll be able to get some parts in some places and not have them on others, and certainly you keep stuff on the boat. And then doing the regular kind of anti-fouling and checking underneath the water, for example, repairing and managing emergencies, and then kind of preparing a toolkit and spares, which we'll talk about. But he also kind of went over some really cool tips and tricks. I mean, there were too many to sort of list here, but there were a couple that were interesting that I thought were useful. So one was about putting sugar in black tanks, which prevents the smell. So I thought that was interesting. It has something to do with the bacteria, and I guess the sugar makes them happy. So I didn't know that before. And then another tip was using dental cleaner to clean water tanks. And both of these things were instead of chlorine. So that was a couple interesting tips. I guess the dental cleaner keeps there's calcium built up or whatever, and supposed to be good for that. So there was a bunch of those that I thought were super interesting by taking a course like this, and I would definitely recommend it to pretty much anyone who was getting ready to do this. So do we want to talk a little bit about the checklist then, Stefan? Just kind of go through.
Yeah, maybe one more thing before we go over the checklist is to also think about all this maintenance is going to be linked to how many different systems you have on your boat. So if you want to keep this offshore maintenance checklist and spare parts and tools to the minimum, then it's a good idea during the option process to also limit the number of systems. And so, for example, we decided to remove the generator. But we introduced the hydro generator. So hopefully it's easier to maintain than the generator. We removed the propane, so we went full electric for the kitchen. So there's things like this that you can do also, thinking very early on to keep the boat, well, I was going to say as simple as possible. Nothing is simple on those boats, but thinking of the old salt sailors, they have a boat with very little on it, and I guess they do probably less maintenance than anybody else. So that's something that was that to keep in mind as you're happy adding stuff to the systems to the boat. And so that was another kind of tip that was good.
Yeah, it's just that's easier said than done, right? Like, we sort of set out with that simple is better idea, but you take stuff out and then you put stuff in, so it's really hard. But anyway, So
Yeah, but it's something at least to keep in mind. And then, if you're going to put AC everywhere, well, that's many more AC units to maintain. If you kind of decide to limit the number of AC units, then it's that many less that you have to maintain. Just little things like this will probably add up. It's just like weight on the boat. You keep adding stuff, but if you can shave weights here and there, it will also add up. So something to keep in mind, and then to not wait to get on the boat, also to get familiar with those systems. So that's what we're talking about, going to training classes and stuff like this. And that will make the learning curve, or the initial kind of learning curve, to a little bit less steep. So let's go to those checklists. I mean, at a high level, obviously, we'll build our own checklist, and we'll probably be happy to share those with people for, but initially we can kind of break down a little bit how to think about it.
Yeah. So I'll start. The first one is really about just looking at all things water related, and the way these checklists are organized, which I think is really good, is there's things you do at sea when you're in a crossing or you're doing a multi-day passage. There are things you do before the crossing or passage, and then there are things you do with a technical stop. So that's how these are a little bit organized. So the first one on all things water would include things like, checking hatches, looking at the mechanisms of some of the hatches and lockers, looking at the bilges, cleaning the bilges, the anchor locker, and just kind of making sure everything's secure in there, testing the bilge pumps and the automatic sensor, and, testing the valves and seacocks and making sure they're opening and closing easily enough. So it's really cool to sort of break it up into those three time frames, because it'll help us just kind of stay on track and stay organized, I think, overall. Do you have anything to add on that one?
And technicals, you want to highlight what is meant by technical stop.
Yeah, so I think that's what it means when there's you need a more in-depth assessment of what's going on, repairs, or maybe you're winterizing, or you're going through, a major upgrade or a major maintenance stop.
Yeah, and to think about some countries might be better for certain things. So that
or
might
marinas,
also,
exactly. Okay, you want to cover one of the next ones?
Yeah, underwater, anything underwater. So typically you don't do this while at sea. So that would be
hopefully not
before crossing. So, but you at anchor, you're going to jump in the water, and so it's good habit once you're in the water to just swim under the hulls and check things out. So that would be, for example, the sail drives. Do a quick inspection on that. Making sure there's a lot of holes under the boat, so making sure those are clean. Check the propeller, just move it around through holes. That's what I was talking about. The hydro generator, making sure that the base, everything is solid, and it's after you've gone through like maybe a passage or an overnight. So there's a lot of stuff that can be done as part of you being in the water, and then do visual checks.
Yeah, that's good. The next one is around deck organization and rigging. So basically what they recommend is to do a daily inspection when you're on a passage or on the water. So just do a walk around. Just checking the state of the tension of the guardrails, for instance, and checking all the pulleys and blocks and major points of connection in the rigging. Making sure you're looking closely at all the jammers and all of that. And then there's sort of more involved things like cleaning the winches, which I know we're all looking forward to, checking the gooseneck, things like that. So, that's an idea of what that's about.
Yeah, I think in many cases, people on a passage do it morning and before night.
Oh, that's a good idea.
That's just walk around the boat and keep looking for little things. Look at the deck. There might be something, a screw or ring or something that fell on the deck.
Mm-hmm.
So, just do your little routine in the morning and at night.
Mm-hmm.
Or before night, sorry.
And then there's sails. So you want to go through this one?
Yeah, sails. I think it's just a visual inspection in most cases, but chafe will be a big one, making sure the sails are not rubbing against something. If there is any beginning of chafe, then you can, put some protection to prevent or maybe adjust certain things, but just things you can do early on. Battens. Something you don't want to lose one. We have carbon battens. They're expensive. So to keep looking at the batten boxes, anything that is just the furling. We've heard quite a few problems with the furling system. So just to do a visual check, and then that might require to get on your knees, and bend over, like look under. But, to look at anything, anything that is moving parts or on the boat.
Yep. And then the next section is around electricity. So just always checking the nav lights. These are just some examples. We're obviously not going through everything. Any water intrusion in any of the lights fixtures or electricity, obviously that would be bad. Checking your power cable for your shoreline and any of the circuits or connections and any of the spare fuses, things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then for diesel, so this one is kind of more of a regular check also. I mean, you'll check for any kind of leaks, corrosion, making sure all the engine room is always clean so you can spot when something changes. But you have the usual check about the different fluids, oil, water, and any of the strainers. So clamps also, making sure those are attached and properly and they haven't moved. Look for any corroded connections. And of course, you have a maintenance plan for your engine. So X amount of hours, you have different things that you have to do. So you have to plan accordingly to keep your warranty. At least with Volvo, that was the case. You have to use a certified Volvo specialist. So it doesn't have to be the exact number of hours, but you have to plan when you get somewhere to maybe have a certified technician come do this maintenance for the first 2 years. We'll see what it is for 90 because we'll have 90 engines.
Mm-hmm. The thing that was interesting about that is because you had taken the diesel mechanics. I think you took it before and then you took it again, and I took some shorter version. It's not so much that right away you're going to necessarily have to fix it, although you may need to, but more, I think it seems like you just need to know how to diagnose the problem, because it seems likely you would probably get help to try to fix it. But, our experience has been we would be somewhere and the certified dealers will come and they're trying to tell you, oh, you need to buy all this stuff. And you're like, no, I think we just need, this one thing checked. So it's good to know how to diagnose the issue so that when you're getting an estimate, you can be really clear about stating what the problem is and not sort of just be left to their creativity to tell you what needs to be done or what they think needs to be done. And that was certainly something we found out.
Yeah. Definitely, yeah.
The next section is really around electronics, and I think this is going to be one I think we're going to need to pay a lot of. I mean, all these you have to pay attention to, but there's just a lot, from making sure all of the we're getting all the right connections, with all of the data we're trying to get, the transmission with the AIS, making sure that's all set up properly. We had a couple little things happen when we were trying to set up the EPIRB initially that we had to work through. Oh, that was like so stressful last time because we were trying to leave and we had to get it set up, and it's a long story, but and then just different types of things that have to do with the autopilot and the radar and making sure, it's set up properly and receiving the right signals and stuff. For doing sat phone, there's things associated with that and also with any of the, Starlink and things. So this one actually is a little bit more complicated. What do you think? I mean, I just feel like that one's a little more nuanced than some of the other sections.
No, I think because you're going to use those different systems, electronics, more regularly, I would say. So your VHF, I mean, that's, of course, at the beginning, I mean, that's the purpose of the shakedown. Yeah. Our goal is going to obviously be using all these systems and making sure that, after a proper shakedown, they're still working, and we're more and more familiar with those systems. But no, I don't see this very different. I think it has its own flavor of challenges, but I think in general, the way I look at it for passages, from my readings of articles and stuff over time, it's typically a lot of boats encounter electrical problems. Mm-hmm. So I think for us, for a new boat, I have in my head that I'm going to go with some tools in every part of the boat and just checking that every screw, every bolt is tightened properly, and making sure that we have good connections and stuff like this. So I don't know how feasible it is, but at least I'm going to attempt to, as we go through the shakedown, to really looking at all these little connections, because that's a very, very common issue. Mm-hmm. That the problems are not typically about the systems like themselves. Mm-hmm. There's a problem you will see right away. But it's more if it's something is not tight properly, or there's beginning of like corrosion, something, over time it's going to happen, and then you wonder, oh, the system doesn't work. But that's really like where you start, looking at making sure all these connections are like working properly, the fuses and stuff. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, it has its own set of challenges, but I think it's just another category.
Yeah, it's just so funny, like back in the olden days, like nobody used any of this either. So, we've become kind of more dependent on it. But yeah, it's just interesting. And then there's just like a bunch of categories, like the water maker, the plumbing, and then the safety equipment. So I'll just cover off on those real quick before we talk about tools and spares. So for water maker, there's filters. You have to check the water pump, the pressure buildup. There's things to do besides just winterize it. So there's that. With plumbing, checking all the water pumps and making sure you have the right pressure as well. Looking and cleaning the tanks, and then all the integrity of the hoses. And we had a problem with that in our last boat. That first season, we opened the bilges and they were like full of water. And I was like, what the heck is going on? And it was actually a freshwater leak from our toilet. So that was interesting. So there's all these little teeny tiny pieces of plumbing and the fittings that kind of go along with them that are important. And then safety equipment, and this is really, really important, is, just making sure you're looking at all your Dan buoy, your grab bag is current, testing your EPIRB, jack lines, life raft, checking your life jackets and making sure that they're set up properly, of course. And you had an issue with that, I think, on a race or something, didn't you? Like
with the SSB.
No, your life jacket.
Is that what you're referring to?
No, didn't you have like
my life jacket.
Yeah.
Yeah. it was pretty sad story, but that was outside the Golden Gate during a race. One sailor fell overboard, was still tied to the boat, but his life jacket never inflated. So basically, he was dragged underwater and drowned, even though he was attached. And if his life jacket had inflated, he would have turned on his back and survived. And the issue was that the cartridge had unscrewed itself a little bit. So when you fall in the water, and the idea is like it punctures the cartridge, so the life jacket inflates, it was unscrewed enough so the puncture didn't happen. So when I read that story, I was like, oh, let me check my life jacket. And then suddenly I'm screwing my cartridge. Oh,
that's so scary.
And yeah, so I'm like, oh, yeah. I mean, it had not fallen off, but it was unscrewed enough that potentially it would have not been punctured as well. So yeah, pretty sad story, but can be prevented by doing a kind of regular maintenance on your life jacket, including inflating it. I think they recommend maybe once a year. I forgot. Don't quote me on this. Check the recommendation. Just leave it overnight, check the next morning to make sure it's still inflated. So there's some basic stuff like you can do about safety equipment that can be really life and death.
Yeah, and that's a sad story, and definitely you just have to check all the time. So you have been really busy because we've been trying to assemble. When I get out there in July, we're going to, go obviously to start to assemble things and purchase things to bring on the boat. So you've been trying to kind of figure out, because there's all these lists you get. So you can get a list from the manufacturer, you can get a list from your friends, you can get a list from experts that say, here's all the stuff you need to put on the boat in terms of tools and spare kits and just general things you need on the boat. What's that been like? Because you've been working really hard to get kind of one single source of truth to figure out what we really need, and we're not buying all unnecessary stuff. I mean, we bought a lot of stuff for our last boat, which I guess is great to have if you ever need it, but you also don't want to necessarily over-purchase a bunch of stuff that you probably won't ever use, right?
Part of it is... Well, there are spare parts. We had bought a lot of spare parts. So I think definitely we didn't need to buy that many spare parts initially. After that, sure, we bought some tools that it's a new boat. So there are certain tools that you probably not going to use in the first few years. So it's a balance between, what you're going to bring on board, and as you go through this list, and have it as an insurance policy, or kind of wait and buy more stuff. So as you said, is there are lists everywhere. So there are lists from Outremer, there's lists from the Chandlery, there's a list from the manufacturers. So basically it gets very, very confusing between all the tools, the products, the spare parts. So I started, kind of trying to organize this, and it became this huge project. And now I feel like I'm never going to see the end of it. But as you said, there's a couple benefits that we're going to have once we have this list. I mean, the first is consolidating all these lists, and then also when it says, okay, buy product A, you also have to look at okay, which brand, which model, So this is where it gets tricky, because now you need to do kind of do a little bit of research, and can be quite time consuming. But I'm putting all these together, and the idea being now it's like I have a column, for example, where I say, okay, this is in the category to buy, or it's already been purchased. So when I go back through my database, I can be like, okay, show me everything that I have set as to buy, and then basically start ordering. And then when you order, it's never going to be also one store.
Mm-hmm.
Certain things you can get online, certain things you get from the channelry, certain things you get from the local store that sells tools and stuff like these. Certain things were going to be from the I forgot to mention the manufacturer itself. So it gets quickly very, very confusing. And then once you start buying stuff, then and you don't have it. Like, for example, we have stuff stored at Outremer, and you go to a store and you're like, oh, did I already buy these? And so now I can easily go look at my list and be like, okay, this is what we have. And then for every product, what I'm doing also is basically, how to use it. So there's some basic knowledge about the product. So, some keywords, some tags. So if I need to do some search, show me all the things that have batteries on board, because maybe we're going to go through like checking batteries at the end of the season. And, so there are certain things like this are going to be quite useful. Obviously, I'm looking at the price, the warranty for each of those items. If I find some manuals, I put them in Google Drive, but I put a link in my database. If there are some YouTube videos that are useful, I already put the link of that YouTube video. So if we have an issue somewhere, or if we have a product to use, then I can, instead of spending an hour searching through YouTube videos, then I can be like, okay, that was the YouTube video that was quite useful. Put a date on when this product was purchased. Might be useful for the warranty. Might be useful for some products that have a lifetime, kind of a shelf life. And also as we use those products, then I can put in the database, okay, we had 10, now we have 2 left. So I'm going to put this as, to buy. So next time we're at the channelry, I'm not trying to think of, oh, what did I need? Like, I can look at my list and so from my phone at this database. So the beauty of it is, it's time consuming right now. And I'm thinking over time, it's going to save us time and headaches and get us organized and put pictures for each of those items as well. So, but it's become kind of this master database. And at times I'm like, oh, where did I start?
Yeah, on the surface, it seems kind of OCD, like, oh, you have every little thing. But I do think, as you kind of started down this journey, I was like, are we going to use that? And then, you think about you're in these really remote places, maybe where they only get one shipment a week for stuff if you have to order things, and you kind of need to be precise about what you're trying to, either replace or get. And, for someone like me who likes to wing it, like, oh, we'll just get, whatever it is, like the poly resin, we'll just get that next time we go. I'm also someone who ends up buying stuff that, doesn't work or you won't need, or then you have this brand new bottle of something that you can't use, that you're not going to use, and you're just kind of carrying it around. So I think it actually makes a lot of sense, and it'll be great once it's set up, for sure. And the other thing that the guy was saying in the maintenance class was useful, because I like label makers and being organized, is then when you set up the boxes and the storage containers for some of this stuff, you can obviously put the label for what it's for, say plumbing or for, sail repair or whatever it is. And then you kind of know what's in it, right? So you're not constantly rummaging around trying to find that thing you need, or even knowing whether or not it's even on the boat, right? And I think, when we first get on the boat, it's not going to be that big of a deal. But if you're on it for, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 years, whatever, you lose track of where your stuff is and how much you have. So I think it's actually going to be super helpful as we sort of, go through our little adventure here. But yeah, at first you were talking to me about it. I was like, oh my God, are you serious? You're doing that? But I can see now why, the preparation up front on some of this stuff is going to be helpful in the long run, for sure.
I hope so, because it's definitely time consuming. But then, for example, like I was like, oh, okay, I'm looking at, also because your boat is going to have a certain flag. This flag is going to have certain requirements of what you need on board. So suddenly I'm going through this list for the French flag, and it's like EPIRB. And I look at my list and I'm like, oh, I haven't put EPIRB yet. So I'm doing a line entry for EPIRB and kind of putting all the information. And then suddenly I'm like, oh, did we buy this as an option? I kind of forgot about it.
Yeah, you can't remember if you bought it already. I know.
Yeah, so then suddenly I go back to my other database of like options with Outremer, and I'm like, oh yeah, that was option 17. We ordered kind of an EPIRB, and it will get the push on the electronic service company will do the registration and everything. So I'm like, oh, we had that. So now I had to. Good thing is we're not going to buy 2 EPIRBs. So that's. But I need all these options that we also ordered through Outremer to add them as items, because that EPIRB needs to be in this list because there is, after 10 years, the battery it's not valid anymore. So there are certain things you need to do some regular testing. So I'll be able to put some dates on when is the next test due for, and I can say, okay, it will be in 6 months, a year. And then I'll be getting a reminder in a year that, these are the things you have to do. So I think ultimately it's going to be a very good tool. But definitely something that we might also share with people.
Yeah, if people are interested, if you want to just drop us an email at sailingalwyn@gmail.com, if that's something that people think they might be interested in. What are you building it in Notion? Is that what you're doing?
Yeah, in Notion, yeah. And so it's a free online database that I'm using for everything. So I think once I've added all the functionality I want to add, and once I have all the lists, then maybe I'll consider like sharing, or if some people want to preview, I can also work something out. But so I think ultimately it'll be very, very, very useful. We'll save probably headaches and keep us on top. Besides the checklist, keep us on top of like all the.
The other thing I was going to say is, we kind of went down this path too. We're like, oh, well, we'll just, because there's companies that'll put together a tools and spare kit for you. And we went down that path, and then you received it, right? And you looked at it, you're like, why did this cost so much? And then and this is how this started, right? Is you start going, well, how much does this stuff cost? And then you look, oh, we can save money if we buy it ourselves, a lot of money. But all of that acquisition of everything's going to happen really quickly, to your point, because the boat's going to be put in the water. We're going to get there. We have like 2 weeks to basically do everything. And if you just sort of, you can buy a lot of stuff really easily that you don't need, or to your point, like buy stuff twice that you forgot that you have somewhere in some other order, or that's coming with the boat. So I think in that little panic mode of not panic mode, but urgency mode in 2 weeks, where you're kind of getting the boat ready and buying everything that needs to go on it, it puts you kind of in a better position to buy actually what you need and not, miss something or duplicate something. So.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start buying stuff. I already started buying stuff because I got a bike, for example. I got a stand-up paddleboard, and so all this stuff goes into this database. It's pretty amazing the number of things that you need to buy initially. So yeah, I'll just keep on ordering stuff. And then, and I'm sure when you get here, then there'll be all the kind of towels and sheets, and so there'll be another store, the IKEA type store. And then when we
are you going to keep a list for that stuff too?
Well, I don't know. There's certain things that might make sense, but not sheets and towels. I don't think so. And but maybe like I don't know, if you get a coffee machine or something, like And there's certain things also, like if you get, I was looking at some items. It's the warranty is 2 years. If you register the product, it's 5 years. So just knowing these things, you have registered the product, you put the date, you might put a reference number or something. And also we've ordered the medical equipment. So there'll be another list of medicine and also devices that I will be adding to this database as well. So it's going to be massive. It's already massive, but it's massive to realize how many things you need.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. So that's what we wanted to cover today, is really about the offshore maintenance and the tools and spares and all of the little bits and pieces you need to have on the boat, and then sort of how we're approaching the maintenance schedule and these kind of 3 time frames, just to be able to do it while we're on a passage, before the passage, and then when we do a technical stop. As always, if you have any comments or questions, please drop those in an email to us at sailingalwyn@gmail.com. Fair winds for now.
Au revoir.